This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, my name is Viv Marks, and today we will be discussing abnormal activity of the heart. First, we will discuss what makes a normal heart rhythm and how it happens. Students should have knowledge of action potential, which is a change in ionic gradients of a cell. Terminology about action potential, cardiac muscle cells, and heart anatomy will be used, so students should have a background in higher level biology, anatomy and physiology, or chemistry. Additionally, we will look at ECG waves, but mastery of how to read these are not required. So we will begin today's lesson by exploring the conduction system of the heart. We will then explain how these cells make their energy by discussing action potential of pacemaker cells. This leads us to examine normal heart rhythm. This way we can contrast the ways abnormal activity affects the rhythm of the heart. Finally, building off of what we've covered, we will discuss the different ways that normal rhythm could be disrupted. The conduction system of the heart begins with the autorhythmic cells, also known as pacemaker cells. These cells are unique in that they can create their own action potential or electric activity. The sinoatrial node sits in the left-hand corner of the heart and is the leader of this system. The SA node beats between 70 to 80 times per minute. This node sets the pace for regular heartbeat, which is between 60 to 100 beats per minute, depending on the person. The rest of the heart follows pace based off the SA node. Next in the system is the atrioventricular node, which sits in the left ventricle of the heart towards the center. The AV node beats 40 to 60 times per minute and may take over pumping the heart if the SA node fails. The bundle of His sits between the right and left ventricles and creates a split that follows the contour of the left and right ventricles. The branches that surround the bottom of the heart are called the Purkinje fibers. Both the bundle of His and Purkinje fibers beat 20 to 40 times per minute. The conduction system of the heart is unique in a few ways. First, these cells are autorhythmic, meaning action potentials are created within the muscle cells rather than being stimulated by neurons. Second, within the action potential of pacemaker cells are funny channels, an area where sodium slowly leaks in to increase membrane potential to reach a threshold. To begin, repolarization of potassium kicks off action potential by opening funny channels. As potassium is being released, sodium slowly enters into the membrane. As sodium concentrations increase within the cell, transient calcium begins to enter and closes the funny channels. While this exchange is happening, a sodium-calcium exchanger pump is constantly taking in 3 sodium ions and releasing a calcium. As calcium and sodium are entering the cell, the concentration reaches about -55 millivolts, the threshold. Once the threshold is met, transient calcium shuts off and long-term calcium turns on. Action potential is then reached with a sudden depolarization of calcium. Calcium channels close and potassium channels open to release and repolarize the membrane. As potassium repolarizes the cell, funny channels open and the process of action potential in pacemaker cells begins again. Each node of the conduction system stimulates a different part of the heart. The SA node, located in the left atrium, stimulates the left and right atrium. The fiber also connects to the AV node. This node stimulates the left and right ventricles through use of the bundle of His and Purkinje fibers. The bundle of His is again the area where the node splits to stimulate each side of the inner heart. The outer part of the heart is stimulated by the Purkinje fibers, which reaches the bottom middle of the heart and extends around the outside of the ventricles. The pathway of conduction is therefore SA node, atrium, AV node, bundle of His, Purkinje fibers to the ventricles. But the rate of the heart can be thrown off, known as arrhythmia, meaning lack of rhythm, or dysrhythmia, abnormal rhythm. In each location of conduction, the pace of the heart can get out of rhythm. This image shows what normal sinus rhythm looks like on an ECG. Without going into detail, the P wave is the small hump before the QRS section, the depolarization of the cell where the line goes up and down. So let's explore the different types of arrhythmias. Originating from the SA node, common dysrhythmias include sinus bradycardia and tachycardia. Bradycardia is the slowing down of the SA node. This results in a slower heart rate, usually less than 60 beats per minute. Normal bradycardia may be normal for sleeping or rest, but clinical sinus bradycardia is not normal for heartbeat. See on the EKG that there is a lot of space in between each beat. On the opposite end, tachycardia is a speeding up of the SA node, firing over 100 beats per minute. Normal sinus tachycardia may be typical for exercise, but clinical tachycardia would not be appropriate for normal heartbeat. Compare the ECG of the sinus bradycardia, sinus tachycardia have beats much closer together. Any dysrhythmia in the atrium are considered clinical and are not natural. They are different forms of atrial tachycardia, which is conductive activity originating outside the SA node. This can happen in one area or multiple areas and travels around the atrium. This is recognized on the ECG by QRS waves and has a rhythm of over 100 beats per minute. These are known as SVTs or supraventricular tachycardias. One form of atrial tachycardia is called atrial flutter and is caused by re-entry issues, such as scars that do not conduct electricity. Instead of going around the scar, the electricity going through the atrium circles in the same area, causing a loop called the re-entrant pathway. The atrium beats between 250 to 350 beats per minute, but because of the AV node, the ventricles beat at a slower pace. On an ECG, we see the flutters where the normal P wave is, called F waves, creating a sawtooth-like pattern. Another form of atrial tachycardia is atrial fibrillation, where the rhythm of the heart beats over 350 beats per minute. Originating at multiple ectopic points, atrial fibrillation is chaotic signals that cause the atrium to twitch rather than contract. Again, the AV node protects the ventricles of the heart and keeps them at a slower pace. On an ECG, atrial fibrillation shows a lack of P waves. These types of atrial tachycardias are not necessarily life-threatening. Since the ventricles are staying on their normal beat, the outsource of blood is normal. Clots may form because there is pooling in the atrium, but the body is still receiving the correct amount of blood. Next is AV node dysrhythmias, which originate at the AV node. The first of these we will be discussing is AV nodal reentrant tachycardia, or AVNRT. This is where a re-entry point, that circling bit of energy, is hitting the AV node, causing the ventricles to beat faster. As mentioned in the last slide, the ventricles are what push out blood to the main arteries of the body. When the ventricles are out of sync, this is where major problems occur. There can also be AV node blocks, sometimes referred to as heart blocks, which is a delay of the atrial depolarization. In first-degree blocks, This means there is an increase of time between P waves and the QRS complex. In second-degree blocks, there is the same amount of time between P waves, though it may be longer than normal. There are two types of second-degree blocks. Mobitz 1, which is an increase of P to R sections, and Mobitz 2, where at some point a QRS complex disappears. You would need a pacemaker to fix this issue. And in third-degree heart blocks, the ventricles beat independently. This means that P waves and QRS complexes are independent and the ventricles are beating between 30 to 55 beats per minute. If you had third-degree heart block, you would also need a pacemaker. Finally, dysrhythmias can originate in the ventricles or the His-Purkinje system. These are deadly forms of heart arrhythmias. Ventricular tachycardia, or VTAC, leads to cardiac arrest. It fires at a point of origin in the ventricle that increases beats to over 100 beats per minute. There is a lack of P waves in ECG readings. The other ventricle dysrhythmia is ventricular fibrillation, where there are many ectopic points that are firing in the ventricles. ECG show VFib as irregular, erratic waves. In both of these dysrhythmias, there is a decrease in cardiac output, as the ventricles are important to pushing out blood to the body. When there is twitching of these ventricles, blood cannot circulate the body constantly. A patient would need a defibrillator to bring the heart back to normal. We began this lesson by reviewing the conduction system of the heart. The conduction pathway of the heart begins at the sinoatrial node, leading to the atrium, then the atrioventricular node, the bundle of His, the Purkinje fibers, and finally the ventricles. Next, we discussed action potential of pacemaker cells, how this pathway is unique in creating its own electrical energy. Finally, we looked at different locations that arrhythmias may take place. The most deadly of the dysrhythmias are ventricle dysrhythmias, as they push out blood and keep nutrients circulating the body. On a personal note, my father passed away from heart failure. He experienced a decrease in cardiac output that was unable to be brought back to normal. Heart disease, it causes 1 out of 4 deaths in the United States, so please take care of your own heart. Here are my sources for all the stuff that we talked about today. Please go and check out Dr. Matt and Dr. Mike. They're fantastic YouTubers. And all of the images were provided by Google Creative Commons, so they are all free to use. Thank you very much for watching this video, and we will see you the next time.